What if one of the greatest minds in psychology saw something so profound in his final moments, it could change the way you see life and death forever? Picture this: a man who spent his entire life mapping the human mind, decoding dreams, and uncovering the hidden patterns of the soul, suddenly finds himself standing on the edge of existence. In that moment, Carl Jung witnessed something so extraordinary, he never spoke openly about it for years. Was it a vision, a warning, or a glimpse into the true nature of the soul itself? This wasn't just a fleeting thought or a dream. It was an experience Jung carried with him until the very end. And here's the thing. What he saw could hold the key to understanding what happens after we take our last breath. Jung kept this vision largely hidden from the world until now. In the next few minutes, you're going to step into that moment, see through Jung's eyes, and uncover an insight that only a handful of people on this planet have ever heard. This isn't just history. This is a rare window into the afterlife, told by the man who spent his life exploring the mysteries of the human psyche. It was the early 1960s. The world was still catching its breath after the chaos of World War II, and humanity was entering a new era: space exploration, the Cold War, the rise of modern psychology. But for Carl Jung, the man who had spent decades exploring the deepest layers of the human psyche, this was the final chapter of his own earthly journey. By 1961, Jung's health was fading. His body was slowing down, but his mind was still alive with questions. This was a man who had mapped the landscape of the unconscious, who had introduced the world to archetypes, the collective unconscious, and the idea that dreams were more than random firing neurons, and they were messages from a deeper reality. And yet, as he lay in his home in Küsnacht, Switzerland, looking out over Lake Zurich, something stirred within him. His friends and students noticed it. He seemed quieter, more contemplative, as if he was listening to something beyond this world. It was as if Jung was already standing with one foot on the shore of another realm. Think about that for a second. A man of science, a man who had always insisted on exploring truth through observation and analysis, was now facing the one mystery none of us can avoid. The question is, what did he find there? And perhaps more importantly, why would a man of science talk about visions beyond death? Jung's entire life had been a balancing act between two worlds, the rational and the mystical. He trained as a psychiatrist, worked side by side with Sigmund Freud for a time, and yet broke away when his own discoveries pushed beyond the limits of Freudian theory. Where Freud saw dreams as wish fulfillment and repressed desires, Jung saw them as the language of the unconscious, shaped by ancient symbols and timeless patterns. His concept of archetypes, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, suggested that all human beings are linked by a shared symbolic inheritance. But here's the thing. Jung didn't stop at theory. He lived it. He explored his own dreams, visions, and even what he called active imagination, a process of entering into dialogue with the figures that appeared in his unconscious. So by the time he reached the end of his life, Jung wasn't just an academic pondering hypothetical ideas. He had walked the inner path. He had stared into the abyss of his own shadow. And now, in those final days, it was as if all of it, decades of research, personal visions, and inner battles, was converging into a single profound experience. It's important to remember the world Jung was leaving behind. The mid-20th century was a time of both great hope and deep existential fear. Nuclear weapons had redefined the meaning of human survival. Philosophers and scientists were debating whether humanity had a soul at all, or whether consciousness was just an accident of biology. Jung's work was controversial. because it refused to limit itself to material explanations. He openly spoke about the spiritual dimension of life, about synchronicities that defied chance, about symbols that seemed to connect us to something eternal. To many in the scientific establishment, this was dangerous territory. To others, it was a lifeline. So imagine the weight of this moment, a man who had defended the bridge between psychology and spirituality was now about to cross it himself. As the days grew shorter, Jung's conversations with those around him became more cryptic. He spoke less about the world's problems and more about what lay beyond. And then came the question that has haunted historians, psychologists, and spiritual seekers ever since. Why would a man of science talk about visions beyond death? Was it because he had abandoned the rational for the mystical? Or was it because at the end of a lifetime of inquiry, he had seen something that confirmed what he had always suspected, that life and death are not opposites, but two sides of the same journey? This is where Jung's story becomes more than biography. It becomes a mirror for all of us. Because whether you're 25 or 65, whether you see yourself as spiritual, scientific, or somewhere in between, this question will come for you too. In a moment, we'll step directly into Jung's vision, into the strange and beautiful imagery that unfolded before his eyes as he hovered between life and death. But before we go, remember this. Everything you're about to hear comes from a man who built his career on uncovering the truth hidden in symbols. If this was just a hallucination, why did he describe it with such clarity, and why did it fit perfectly into the framework of his life's work? Because maybe it wasn't just a vision. Maybe it was the ultimate revelation. And then it happened. Jung later described it not as a dream, not as a fantasy, but as a direct experience so vivid and so tangible that it felt more real than the physical world. He found himself in a vast sacred space. There was no ordinary scenery here, no hospital room, no sound of ticking clocks, no weight of the body. Instead, before him stood what he called the temple of the self. Imagine a structure so immense that it seemed to contain the entire universe within its walls. The air shimmered with a light unlike anything on earth. Not the harsh glare of the sun, nor the soft glow of candlelight, but a pure primordial radiance that felt alive. Jung recognized it immediately, not from this life, but from somewhere deep in the collective memory of humankind. At the entrance stood what he later referred to as the archetypal gatekeeper, a presence not quite human, not quite divine, yet deeply familiar. This figure did not speak in words, but Jung understood its message instantly. You stand at the threshold. Are you ready to enter? And there, on the floor of the temple, he saw the perfect symmetry of a mandala, a great circle divided into intricate patterns, each segment pulsing with meaning. Jung had spent decades studying mandalas, recognizing them as symbols of wholeness in dreams and visions. But this was no drawing in a notebook, no ancient carving in a monastery. This was alive. The patterns seemed to move, to breathe, as if they were the heartbeat of reality itself. For Jung, this was more than beauty, it was recognition. He had seen fragments of this image in countless dreams, from his patients in ancient mythologies, in sacred art, from Tibet to the Americas. Now it was here before him, not as metaphor, but as the true center of existence. If you've ever read accounts of near-death experiences, NDEs, you'll notice certain patterns, a journey through light encounters with beings or loved ones, a sense of timelessness. Jung's vision shared some of these features, but it was also deeply personal, shaped by the language of his own life's work. Modern neuroscientists might say that as the brain shuts down, it releases chemicals like DMT, creating vivid hallucinations. But here's the question: why would the brain choose symbols so consistent, so ancient, and so universally recognized across cultures? Why a temple? Why a gatekeeper? Why the mandala? This is where Jung's perspective stands apart. He believed the unconscious wasn't just a personal archive of memories, it was connected to a collective unconscious, a reservoir of symbols and archetypes shared by all humanity. In other words, he wasn't just seeing random images from his own mind. He was stepping into a space that belonged to all of us. To Jung, this vision wasn't proof of a specific religious doctrine. It wasn't a sermon about heaven or hell. It was something deeper, a missing piece in the puzzle of human understanding. For decades, he had been bridging psychology and spirituality, showing that the symbolic life wasn't a luxury for mystics, but a necessity for wholeness. Now, standing in the presence of the temple of the self, he felt that bridge extend beyond life itself. The threshold wasn't an ending, it was a continuation, a passage into a greater reality. And maybe that's why he called it the self, not himself, but the self with a capital S, the center and totality of all existence. The place where every story, every life, every soul converges. So here's the question. Jung's vision leaves for us: if this temple, this mandala, this gatekeeper exists for each of us, how are we preparing to face it? Are we living in a way that aligns with our deeper nature? Or are we moving through life ignoring the symbols that are quietly guiding us? Because whether you see this as science, spirituality, or something in between, Jung's final vision challenges us to consider one possibility. What we call death might just be the doorway back to the truest part of ourselves. For Jung, what he saw in that vision was not a hallucination. It wasn't just the brain firing off random images in its final moments. No, this was something much deeper. It was the language of the unconscious speaking in its purest form. Jung had always taught that our unconscious mind doesn't communicate in plain words, it speaks in symbols. And the symbols he saw in that temple were the same ones he had spent his life studying: the radiant mandala, the threshold, the gatekeeper. These were not personal inventions of his mind. They were archetypes, timeless patterns that live in all of us. At the heart of it all was the self, not the self we use in everyday conversation, but the capital S self, the ultimate archetype. Jung saw it as the center and totality of the psyche, the unifying point where the conscious and unconscious meet. In his vision, the temple of the self wasn't just a building, it was a living representation of that center. It's as if life is a long journey spiraling toward that center, and death is the moment we step into it fully. When Jung stood before that temple, he wasn't seeing a religious heaven or hell. He was seeing the completion of a lifelong inner process, the final integration of who he truly was. But no journey to the self comes without challenge. Jung often wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or fear. It's not just our dark side in the moral sense. It's the sum of all that we've left unacknowledged. The archetypal gatekeeper in his vision may have been a symbol of that test standing guard to ensure he had faced his own shadow before crossing the threshold. It's a reminder for all of us: you can't enter the deepest truth of yourself without first confronting what you've tried to avoid. Jung also spoke of the anima, the feminine aspect within a man, and the animus, the masculine aspect within a woman. To him, wholeness meant embracing these inner opposites, bringing them into balance. In the mandala's patterns with their perfect symmetry, he may have seen this balance reflected, a signal that he had completed that work. It's as though the vision was showing him: you've brought your inner opposites into harmony. You're ready to pass through. This is where the vision becomes more than just a mystical story. Jung wasn't simply getting a preview of the afterlife, he was being shown a map to inner completion. Think about it: the self as the destination, the shadow as the barrier to overcome, the anima animus as the balance to achieve. This is the same journey we all walk, whether we realize it or not. And his vision was the ultimate confirmation that this inner work matters not just in life, but beyond it. And here's the part that gives me chills: Jung wasn't alone in this. Across cultures and centuries, people who have had near-death experiences often describe something eerily similar: passing through a gateway, entering a place of perfect harmony, encountering a presence that feels like both a guide and a judge. From ancient Tibetan teachings about the clear light to modern NDE testimonies, the imagery is strikingly consistent. This isn't the private dream of one man, it's part of a universal human experience. So the question is, if so many people across time and cultures see similar things, are we really going to dismiss it all as mere hallucination? Or are we willing to entertain the possibility that these visions are glimpses into the deeper architecture of reality? For Jung, the vision was personal, but the message was universal. The afterlife isn't just about what happens when you die. It's about how you live now. Are you moving toward yourself? Are you facing your shadow? Are you balancing the opposites within you? Because if this map is real, every choice you make in life is part of that journey toward the temple. And one day, when you arrive at that threshold, the question won't be about your achievements or possessions. It will be whether you've done the inner work to step through the gate. If this vision was a message, what was it trying to tell us? Jung never claimed his experience was meant for him alone. In fact, the way he spoke about it carefully, almost with reverence, suggested that he believed it held meaning for anyone willing to listen. And perhaps the first part of that message is, this death is not the opposite of life. It's part of it. For most of us, death feels like a wall, a final full stop in the sentence of our existence. But Jung's vision reframes it as a doorway, a continuation of the same journey we've been walking all along. And here's the uncomfortable truth: the way we live now shapes the way we will step through that door later. Think about it. If life is a school for the soul, then death might be the graduation, except there are no diplomas, no ceremonies, no applause. The only test is whether you've grown into the person you are meant to become. Jung's temple, the gatekeeper, the mandala. All of it points to the idea that the afterlife is not a place of random assignment, but a reflection of the inner work we've done. If you've avoided your shadow, ignored your deeper self, or refused to reconcile the parts of you that are in conflict, maybe that gate doesn't open. That's not a threat, it's an invitation. Because if we start doing that work now, death becomes less of a terrifying unknown and more of a natural transition. And here's where the emotional weight of Jung's vision really hits. On one hand, there's hope, the hope that our lives have meaning beyond the physical, that there's more waiting for us than we can see. His vision of light, harmony, and wholeness suggests that death can be a homecoming, a return to the deepest truth of who we are. On the other hand, there's fear, not the fear of pain or oblivion, but the fear of being unprepared. Jung's gatekeeper wasn't there to punish him, but to make sure he was ready. And that's a sobering thought. When your time comes, will you be? And finally, there's the possibility of liberation, freedom from the constant pressure to prove ourselves in the eyes of others. If Jung's vision is true, then the only approval that matters is the one we give ourselves, knowing we face the truth within. So maybe the warning is this: don't wait for the final moments to start your inner work. Don't wait until you're standing at the threshold to wonder who you've become. The journey toward the self isn't something you can cram for like an exam. It's a lifetime of small, deliberate steps toward wholeness. This means asking yourself hard questions now, Am I living authentically? Am I facing the parts of myself I'd rather hide? Am I nurturing the parts of me that bring light into the world? Jung's vision reminds us that death doesn't erase the work we've left undone. It reveals it. We live in a time where it's easier than ever to distract ourselves from these questions. Endless scrolling, constant noise, the illusion that we have all the time in the world. But the truth is, we don't know when we'll reach that gate. And maybe that's why Jung's vision still matters today, because it cuts through the noise and asks the question we're all avoiding. If you were to stand before that threshold tonight, would you be ready to walk through Carl Jung's final vision? Wasn't just a private moment in the life of one man. It was a mirror. A mirror that reflects back to each of us, the path we've walked, the choices we've made, and the parts of ourselves we've either embraced or ignored. When we look at his story, we're not just studying history or analyzing an interesting psychological case. We're standing in front of the same threshold he stood before. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day. And the truth is, none of us knows when that day will come. That's why this vision matters. Because it's not about believing exactly what Jung saw. It's about asking yourself, if I saw what Jung saw, would I be ready? Would you be able to walk through that gate without hesitation? Would you meet the archetypal gatekeeper with a steady gaze, knowing you've done the inner work to face your shadow and integrate yourself? Or would you feel the weight of things left unfinished? This is your chance, not at the end, but right now, to start living with the awareness that every step you take shapes who you'll be when you reach that threshold. Because if Jung's vision teaches us anything, it's that preparation for death is really preparation for life. So take a moment after this video ends to reflect. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding that I need to face? What part of me have I been neglecting? And what can I do today to align more closely with my deeper self? In our next video, we're going to decode the 7 archetypes Jung believed could guide the soul even after death, symbols that may already be appearing in your dreams, your choices, and your most powerful life experiences. Once you see them, you'll never look at your own journey the same way again. So if you haven't already subscribed, turn on notifications and join us for that deep dive. And if Jung's vision stirred something in you, share this video with someone who's ready to explore life, death, and the mystery in between. Because the truth is, the journey doesn't end at the threshold. It continues. And maybe, just maybe, it's already begun for you.